serving as president of Historic Tougaloo College. We welcome you to this press conference and discuss the activity that's taking place here this week, the conference to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summit. We want to welcome those who are listening in and participate with us as we go through this exciting week of commemoration and an opportunity to look forward toward the future of what the lessons from the past can inform us about how to continue to use our energy, our focus, our ideas to construct a more inclusive, fair, and equitable world for all humankind. It is a pleasure to have all of you on the hallowed grounds of Tougaloo College. Tougaloo College is a historically black institution that was founded in 1869 by the American Missionary Association. It has a rich and deep legacy of engagement in social justice issues. It grew out of the Amistad Committee that was formed to defend the Africans who were taken captive on the Amistad ship and refused to, and took over the ship, thinking that they would take it back, steer it back to Africa, and landed on the shores of Connecticut. The Amistad Committee evolved into the American Missionary Association that came south to establish 6 institutions for the education of the recently freed slaves and their descendants. Tougaloo College was one of those institutions. The land on which Tougaloo College sits today was part of the old John W. Body plantation. So it is historic in that sense that here we are 144 years later. An institution that was erected from the ruins of an old slave plantation that served to shackle the mind and body and spirit of black people in their pursuit of full citizenship in America, now stands this intellectual oasis of freedom and ideals. Tougaloo College advanced through the years on the principles of academic excellence and social responsibility, which really became the distinguishing characteristics of this institution. And through our education and collaboration in this community, as we prepare young people to become the leaders and responsible citizens that will continue to impact society, Tougaloo College opened its doors to the community and invited the community in, became a real part of the community. And during the 1940s and 1950s and 1960s, Tougaloo College became like an epicenter for a movement, time had come. The Tougaloo College nine students who organized to integrate the public library in downtown Jackson actually spearheaded the Jackson movement. Medgar Evers spent a great deal of time on this campus with the students, organizing the youth councils. They got involved. The administration at that time was very sympathetic to the movement and encouraged student activism. And for the young people out there, I want you to know that it was the students, it was through the student activism that the movement took place. The students volunteered, and even doing the Freedom Riders, and we have one of the original 13 Freedom Riders, when they came into Mississippi, it was to Tougaloo College that they came. Tougaloo College became that safe haven, that gathering place, that resting place for all of the activists and men and women who believed in the principles of justice, freedom, and equality, and believed that all people deserve equal dignity. They came to Tougaloo College for that purpose. They came to Tougaloo College to devise a strategy. This was the gathering place for people like Dr. Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, Bob Dylan, Fannie Hamer. Thousands of people came and participated and gave support to the men and women of the movement. People just have the saying that if they could just get to the historic gates of Tougaloo College, just get to the gates of Tougaloo College, they knew that they would be safe. So it's very fitting as we come 50 years after Mississippi Freedom Summit that we would gather here at this historic place. History really does have a future, and we always look at opportunities where we can, where that motto can be evidence. And there's no better place than here at this gathering when we look at our 500 youth who come to the Youth Congress, and we look at the veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, and we look at others from SNCC and the Freedom Riders and all of those who made up that movement. We're here together to share that kind of history and inspiration with these young people. There's no better place than Tougaloo College to give their real authenticity to this whole conference and to bring it all together. Tougaloo College is excited to partner with the veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. the Mississippi State NAACP, One Voice, SNCC, and others to bring this conference together. And we are honored and privileged to serve as the host site. We honor Tougaloo College for all of its years of dedication and faithfulness by returning to the place where it took place 50 years ago. So we want you all to enjoy yourselves here. We want you to breathe in the freshness of the air here at Tougaloo College. We want you to walk among the Spanish moss. Those of you who came here 50 years ago, we want you to retrace your steps, but we also want you to feel the spirit of Tougaloo College that exists here today and know that you will come home again. For those of you who are new to come to Tougaloo College, please let them know that you are welcome and that Tougaloo College will always be that place for people to come and share ideas and to formulate plans and look toward the future as we continue today to educate the students we serve for democracy. Danny Glover is supposed to be here today. He had death in his family. He could not join us. Dave Dennis is traveling with the youth people in Philadelphia and other places, and so is Bob Moses, occupied with some other pre-obligations. But we're excited about all of you who are here, and we want you to feel that you really come to a special place. And you come to a place of belonging. You not just come to a place with historic significance, but you come to a place of contemporary relevance, because Tougaloo College continues today through its foundations of academic excellence and social responsibility to prepare and inspire this generation of students to be just as committed to the social issues of their time and to use this opportunity and the knowledge that they gain here to make a difference for the betterment of humanity. So welcome to historic Tougaloo College, and we're so excited to be your host. Thank you. And now at this time, Mr. Hollis Watkins, who is honorary chairperson for this conference and head of the veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, will come before you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I'm just going to talk just for a brief few moments about why we need a freedom zone in Mississippi. Contrary to Tougaloo being a place that believes in freedom, justice, and equality, the state of Mississippi was a place that did not believe in freedom, justice, and equality for all people. Mississippi at that time, you could say, was a closed society. Now, what is it that we're talking about when we say closed society? In closed society, we're talking about a place where there's a few who are dominating and controlling. They have that, they intend to keep that, and will do whatever is necessary to maintain that domination and control. There's one thing that I think all of us should realize and come to know, that our whole fight is not so much about racism, but it's about dominating and controlling. And racism is just one of the tools those who empower, and dominate, and control use to enhance and make sure they continue to dominate and control. Here in Mississippi, there was this thing called the press. So who was dominating and controlling the press? Because of the same ones who were dominating and controlling the political and economic aspect of the state, also controlling the media of the state, did not give permission and did not allow the things that was going on in Mississippi to be reported, because they wanted to keep it in this closed society. without allowing it to get out. Knowing that people across the country and across the world knew how abusive, how racist that Mississippi was and how they treated, especially black people. They knew that people would begin to move, come to the aid of those who were deprived, come to the aid of those who were being tortured, who were being murdered. And that's something that they didn't want. So they had to make sure that that kind of information never made it out. So we felt that if we brought the children of these same kind of people from across the country into Mississippi, where they could bear witness and even receive some of the same kinds of treatment that blacks were receiving in Mississippi. This would give us needed attention outside of Mississippi. And therefore, the rest of the world would begin to take a look at Mississippi. And with a little encouragement, the rest of the world would begin to use their persuasion to inspire and motivate the people in Mississippi to change their ways. And this is part of what the whole piece of Freedom Summer was about, to help break Mississippi out of jail of itself, so the rest of the world would actively participate in the process. So we wanted that to happen. We think through that hundreds and hundreds of people from outside of the state came, and many of them did bring the press along with them, which gave us a greater latitude that also eventually led to the murder, the beating, and the mistreatment to begin to diminish. So these are a few of the reasons that we felt we had to have Freedom Summer. And having all of these things diminished, then that means the whole thing of fear will also be diminished. And we gradually give power not only to a few, but begin to spread the power among the masses of the people. And when I say power, I mean, when I say power, I'm talking about having the capacity to make things happen and not happen. One of the ways that this become powerful is to register a lot of our people to vote. At that particular time, it was only one place in the state of Mississippi that had black elected officials. And that was all black time, among black. So hopefully this sheds some more light on why we felt the 1964 summer project known as Freedom Summer was important and had to come about. Thank you.
In addition to the national chair for the Freedom Summer, we have with us today Hank Thomas, who's the national co-chair of Freedom 50. And Mr. Thomas, as I mentioned earlier, was one of the 13 original freedom riders. And following Mr. Thomas will be Albert Sykes, who's an organizer for Freedom 50 Youth Congress. And he's the advocacy director for the Now People's Project. And after that will be Derek Johnson, who's the national co-chair as well for Freedom 50. And he's president of the Mississippi State NAACP. And following Derek will be Judith Brown Diaz, who's co-director of the Advancement Project. These individuals have been really faithful and consistent advocates for the movement, and some of them are activists themselves.
Good afternoon. I'm a freedom rider and also a Buffalo soldier. Do you know what a freedom rider was or is? Let me tell you about a Buffalo soldier. Buffalo soldier is any black man or woman who wore the uniform of the country, served the country, but at the same time did not enjoy the freedoms and privileges for which they fought for other people. My grandfather was a Buffalo soldier who served in World War I. My father was a Buffalo soldier who served as a Marine in World War II. Neither one of them, when they came back home, could vote. That's what a Buffalo soldier was. I'm also a historian, or racist reader of history, and I like to connect our freedom struggle, and indeed they are connected to the freedom struggles of people all over the world, especially people of color, who struggled in the 20th century, even after World War II, to throw off the yoke of colonialism. And the first who were successful in doing that were the Indians, who were led by Mahatma Gandhi, who spiritually influenced what we were doing here, Dr. Martin Luther King being one of his disciples. And then there were the Indonesians, who fought to overthrow the colonial yoke of the Netherlands. So our struggle was inextricably morally bound to what they were doing. So what we did in this country, men and women everywhere who have been oppressed have fought to throw off the yoke of their oppressors. I like to compare also, for the sake of clarity on the part of white Americans, our struggle here in Mississippi and throughout the South and in this country to become free and first-class citizens with what the American forces were doing in Europe. In 1942 is when the American forces first landed in North Africa on their way to Berlin to end World War II. Well, our first great uprising in this country occurred on February the 1st, 1960, when the 4 freshman students at North Carolina A&T started to sit in, and it spread like wildfire throughout the North. It was our Boston Massacre, our shot that was heard around the world, and students were here at Toulouse, Southern Alabama A&M, throughout the South, rose up, and that was the beginning of the first successful mass movement for freedom in this country for us. And then 1 year later, we had the Freedom Rides. And as I've spoken previously, of the 430 Freedom Riders that were arrested here in Jackson, 50% of them were white. So we had allies throughout our particular struggle. And then the Freedom Rides gained rise in terms of the spirit of rebellion, and revolution came 1964 Freedom Summer. And all of that culminated in the signing of the Civil Rights Bill, which was 50 years ago on July the 2nd. And next week I'll be going to Washington for the commemoration of that. So there is a link, just like we talked about the Allied troops landing in 42 in North Africa, and then 3 years later on Berlin. So from 1960 to 1964, when the Civil Rights Bill was passed, that was the progression of things in this country. And then, of course, the next year was the Selma to Montgomery March. So just like in all fights for freedom, certain things happen in stages. There are battles that ultimately lead to the greater victory, and that was with the signing of the Civil Rights Bill of '64 and the Voting Rights Bill of '65, an additional Civil Rights Bill of 1968, where we have it now. And of course, as I said earlier, all of our efforts, even though we still have things to do, culminated with the first family, the Black family, that's in the White House today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Albert Sykes, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Freedom Summer Youth Congress. This week in Tupelo, here in the great city of Jackson, Mississippi, we had over 700 young people who converged to begin thinking and building together from the community and political organizing aspect. 50 years ago, 1,000 college students showed up in Mississippi to do the work that needed to be done to open Mississippi up to the country. And 50 years later, almost 1,000 kids are here again to do the work that needs to be done to open this country up to the world. I would like to thank Dr. Hogan and Tulu for being gracious host of the Freedom Summer Youth Congress, and also want to thank folks like Dave Davis and Bob Moses, as well as Ms. Marilyn Wright Elman, who is out on the road with about 400 students right now, visiting Meridian in Philadelphia to pay homage to the sacrifices of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, but also the sacrifices of every other person who volunteered in 64 and who played a role in the Freedom Summer project in 64 and who have done so much work since then. Also, I wanted to say that this experience is not an opportunity for just young people, but it's an opportunity for youth and civil rights veterans to have time to sit down in rooms together, to hear from each other, to hear the stories of what happened in 64, the strategies that were carried out, but also for young people to be able to share the things that are plaguing their lives and communities today, and to be able to do that in a way that they have strategies when they leave Mississippi around what are the things that they're going to go on and do. And I'm most proud that our workshops are mostly led by high school and college age folks. We had more submissions for workshops than we could handle, and we've been able to accommodate a lot of people and put young folks in front of each other to begin leading each other, because we believe, as they believe, that strong people don't need strong leaders, and so we want to let these young people be in rooms and lead themselves and build off of each other. I wanted to thank the veterans of Mississippi Civil Rights Movement also for setting the stage for where we are today, and definitely for holding the truth to making sure that the story of Mississippi and the Mississippians who play a role in making the Mississippi Summer Project happen will be lifted up. Many times when you hear about Freedom Summer, you only hear about those college kids from around the country, but you don't hear about the folks who open their doors to have those folks. And that's also the difference that we want young people to come here and learn about. And I won't take any more time. I just want to say that for the rest of the week, we're going to work hard on the day and we're going to party hard at night. And we expect to see how they are come and they'll be with us. So thank you.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank President Hogan and Tulu College for allowing the conference to be here. This was important for the NAACP to partner with the veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. The historic nature of the Mississippi Project, commonly known as Freedom Summer, set the tone for how democracy will be opened up for Americans across the country. But it also sets the stage today for us to recognize that there's still much work to be done. Veterans 50 years ago worked around 4 primary issues. This conference, we will discuss those 4 primary issues: access to voting, education, access to quality health care, and worker rights. In fact, some of the issues that we're going to talk about are activities that's currently underway. In Mississippi, there has been a ballot initiative to amend our state constitution to ensure that equity formula that has not been fully funded since this adoption was twice as a part of our Constitution, along with ensuring that every child have a fundamental right to a quality education. You have young people, some are Tulu students and Jack State students who have been advocating to ensure that the workers of the Nissan plant have the ability to collectively bargain. You have organizations such as the NAACP in partnership with other organizations nationally, like the VASP Project, monitoring how elections are carried out to ensure that voter suppression methods like voter ID would not prevent individuals from casting a ballot. Unfortunately, for the first time since the passage of Constitutional Amendment in 2011, the state of Mississippi has decided to implement a voter ID law. We were able to prevent implementation of the law because Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was fully enforceable. We were able to demonstrate that voter ID in Mississippi did in fact have a discriminatory impact on African American voters. But unfortunately, the Supreme Court last year decided that Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act no longer applied, rendering Section 5 ineffective for states like Mississippi. We will continue to monitor the process as we build and document how voter ID do in fact disenfranchise voters. Our Secretary of State right after the election on June 3rd announced the success of voter ID and stated only 300 people were not allowed to vote because they lacked ID. Only 300 people were not allowed to vote because they lacked identification. Voter ID is akin to a poll tax, the same type of barrier that many of the veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement fought against 50 years ago. We are here at this conference to discuss and strategize how do we open up democracy and not allow the barriers of the past to reemerge and prevent all of our citizens from enjoying their constitutional right to vote. All of our children from being provided a quality education. All of our seniors, especially our elders, we have access to quality health care. But more importantly, all of our workers to be paid a fair wage for a fair day's work. Thank you all for coming out and joining us for this historic event. This is a conference not only to commemorate and celebrate, but it's a conference to re-energize, learn from one another, and discuss how do we lead the gates of this historic institution in ways in which we can make the democracy of this state, the democracy of this country, something that's inclusive and better for all. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Judith Brown-Dianis, co-director of the Advancement Project. First, before I open up for Q&A, I want to say how honored the Advancement Project is to be part of the conference. We have 12 staff who have come down to be part of the conference, but really important to us is that 15 years ago, when Advancement Project opened our doors, we opened our doors working here in Mississippi. I was just telling Hollis that I learned how to be a community lawyer from him. I learned about the struggle for freedom in Mississippi and what it would mean to be a lawyer working in that struggle that was continuing to go on. Today, as you may know, there's a hearing on the Voting Rights Act amendments that went on in the Senate, the U.S. Senate today, as we sit here, as we continue to fight for democracy, we continue to fight for freedom, and we continue to fight for equal education. We are here to commemorate 50 years of Freedom Summer, but the fight continues. So I wanted to open it up for questions. I'm here to help facilitate those questions. If you could please, if you have a question, please say your name and where you're from, and I will direct the questions. Yes.
Deborah Beverly with the Red Washington Bureau and UK. This is the race that happened yesterday. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of the Black vote in that race, and 50 years later, what the result all saying?
There was a Senate race yesterday, a Republican primary election, and the Senator Cochran staff, his campaign staff are celebrating the fact that a larger than normal vote was received from the African community. We think that is significant, but even more significant, it gives Senator Cochran the opportunity to sign on to a bill to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. But for the Voting Rights Act, those African Americans who turned out to the polls yesterday to support his re-election, they would not have the right to do so. So we are hopeful that as a result of the voting turnout yesterday from the African American community, that there's a reciprocity, that his staff will support reauthorization to ensure African Americans in the future, if needed, can also go out and vote in that scenario. This is the second time African Americans turned out to ensure his victory. Now, we look to him for the first time to stand up and support the authorization of the Voting Rights Act.
Questions? No questions?
Margie Thompson from Escribano in Costa Rica. I'm wondering if any of you could talk about the role of silencing, and the silencing for many people looking back on the 1960s and the Civil Rights Movement, but then also the silencing of today around race and racial tensions, which I think is not only unique to Mississippi. And the role of this conference in perhaps breaking that cycle.
trying to yield to the young folks for the city. They're waiting on me. But at any rate, you always have a serious problem in justice being done when there's a lot of silence that goes on. And what you have to look at is, why is that silence taking place? And in most cases, it's taking place because of fear. Because of fear. Why is there so much fear? There's a lot of fear, then you understand that there's a lot of mistreatment, there's a lot of brutality, and all of these things that is taking place. That's why I say, especially to the young folks, most of us old folks, it's hope for us on this. That is that you got to come out of the state of denial and overcome fear, and not allow whatever it is that causes you to have fear, you overcome that. Where that you can say what needs to be said, when it needs to be said, to whom it needs to be said, and then you take that on over into doing what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, with or to whom it needs to be done. Because if you remain silent, then a silent vote in most cases is a no vote. And that's part of the strategy that was used against us as a part of the civil rights movement. When I talk about how fear permeated the community back during the early 60s, I'm not talking about just the black community. It was just that deep in the white community, just like it was in the black community. So you are putting people into a situation by which they become afraid to exercise, in many cases, a right and privilege that they know that they should have, that they're entitled to. We have to begin to make sure that our elected officials understand rights and corresponding duty. If I got a right to this, and you're in this position, you have a corresponding duty to make sure that I get to exercise my right.
Also, I think in connection with this silence is embarrassment. America is a country of great hypocrisy. We have the Statue of Liberty, which welcomes people here who have been oppressed, and we pride ourselves, when I say we, are talking about the American people in general, pride ourselves always standing up for the underdog and going to war to help oppressed people, while at the same time, black people here were being oppressed. So there is a sense of denial in terms of the dark side of American history. There have been a few occasions when I've been asked to speak at a high school, and I've asked the question, would you vote for a man for president if it were known or exposed by CNN that this man's wealth was built because he hired people and he would not pay them? And not only would he not pay them, he wouldn't give them a day off, no kinds of benefits, and whenever he wanted to, he would rape some of these employees. And of course, the answer was, of course not, we wouldn't vote for such a person. But we have a monument to such a person in Washington. His name is Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was a rapist. He was a morally degenerate person. But this is what we hold him up as the paragon of virtue. This is that schizophrenic side of the American personality. So part of that silence is, if you discuss it too much, then it exposes you to the hypocritical part of our history. The Japanese have that same problem with dealing with the atrocities that they committed and dealing with the way they have done with the Koreans. Only lately, in terms of the past couple of decades, have the Germans fessed up, if you will, faced up to what they did to the rest of Europe and especially to the Jews. And now the French, for a long period of time, would not face up to the part they played in the complicity with the Germans and the deportation of the Jews and the way they treated the Algerians. So to get back to the original question, I think it's part of that embarrassment, part of that shame, and this is why we don't discuss it today. You'd like to think that was way back then, not realizing that we still have some of that problem today. And I think when we get to the point, and it might be academically a moot point, when we stop looking at George Washington, Andrew Jackson, and the rest of those degenerates as our founding fathers, then I think we'll begin to make some progress in terms of coming to grips with what this country has done to both black folks and to the Native Americans.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
You see, this is now, you see in the present day, the residences of the movement, as we call it, things like the Occupy folks, what's happening today that reminds one of what's happening before.
What we're experiencing right now reminds me of that. The lack of publicity on many of the positive things that we see that is taking place. People tell me all the time, for example, young people just ain't gonna be nothing, they ain't gonna be nothing, and all that. And by me being one that's out there working, I see young people more involved today than they were as a whole during the early days of the 60s. If you take the 1964 summer project out of that scenario, you'll see that the number of young people being involved in doing things today far exceeds that of which we had going back during the early 60s. So what is happening? Media is still being used to not publicize all of the positive things that these young people are doing because they are tied into the old establishment and they're afraid that if young people here find out about the young people over there, then they say, well, I'm not going to let you outdo me, they'll do that. So they're trying to keep all of us under a different kind of hood. But this conference itself lets us know that it ain't working. Because of it not working, we can use the words of James Brown when he said, I feel good.
I'm very excited to have organizations like the Dream Defenders here right now. Organizations like the Alliance for Educational Justice, the Young People's Project. And then also, I think the thing that people need to understand in terms of this ballot initiative that Derek is talking about is that there are college kids that are out there hammering the ground right now to get signatures for that petition to get this initiative on the ballot for folks to vote on next year. It's also young folks that came to Mississippi specifically because they wanted to learn from and learn about this initiative and to work with the young people who are making it happen. And there's several of them doing it, but there are two great ones here in Jackson that have really taken this thing and run with it. But I can say that there's many other things like Occupy that happen. I think when you look across the country, you see Arab Spring. I think that this generation has taken on a responsibility of holding the world's mirror, making the world look at what it's doing to itself and to its people. As we speak right now, we have kids that are laid up in cages that's covering themselves with aluminum foil because they tried to come across the border to live, not to steal a job, not to try to make money, but they came here for the opportunity to live and the opportunity to learn. On this campus right now, we have folks from Freedom University who are undocumented folks in Georgia, and some of those students will actually be attending Tougaloo next year because Tougaloo, being a free-minded and a free-thinking school, is one of the schools that says that if you're able to achieve everything that it takes to get out of high school, why should you not be able to go to college? And hopefully that gets me a free scholarship. And so I'm excited to see it. And also, I think what you're seeing with these youth conferences is the great trajectory of folks like Ella Baker, working with folks like Bob Moses, who works with folks like Hollis Watkins, who turns around and snatches up folks like Derek Dickinson, who opens the door for a person like me and puts me in a position to open the door for young folks to come after us. And so I'm very excited to see what's happening here, but I'm more excited to think about what the next 2 or 3 years is going to look like because today happened. So thank you.
Well, with that great note, we are ending this press conference, and thank you everyone for showing up.